In this session, we're going to be talking about the OAuth 2.0 flow, right? So exactly what is the OAuth 2.0, right? And why do we need it, right? And most often, you probably already experienced this. Imagine you went to a website, you clicked on a link that actually said log in with your Google credentials. And in the background, what it's actually doing is taking you over to the Google server. You're entering your credentials in there, and then you're getting access to what you need. So in this scenario, we're going to be looking at something similar, right? So let's look at our setup here. We have our client on the left-hand side. So think of this as kind of like LinkedIn, right? So we're trying to start off with our LinkedIn here, right? And basically, when we look at the OAuth 2.0 flow, there's kind of like two phases, right? There's setting up for access, and then there's the actual getting access, right? So we need to do some initial upfront work before we can actually get access to what we want. So in this scenario, think about on the client side, we're logging in, and basically what we want to do is we want to import our contacts from Google into LinkedIn so we can actually have it pre-set up for us, right? So when we click on that login actual button here, what we're doing here, we're getting redirected. So that's the first thing here. And where the location that we're going to be redirected to is the actual Google's authorization server. So that's the main first step here. Then what actually happens is the authorization server sends back to the client an authorization grant. Okay, so an authorization grant, a code, it sends back to the client. And then what actually happens is when the client receives that, the client is then going to go out to the authorization server, and it's basically going to say, here is my authorization grant that you gave me, the code, right? And in return, the authorization server is going to give the client the access token. And that's what we need here. So the access token is now giving its permission, right? So simply what now happens is we want to now go and access the resource server. So in this instance, we want to access contacts.google.com or some kind of like API server. And what we're essentially doing now is we're actually basically saying, okay, I now want to access the resource server, and I'm actually going to specify my access token. Okay, and that's basically essentially what is happening. And then I'm getting the contact information back from the resource server. And that's exactly what it is, right? So a couple of things in this kind of model that I just want to highlight here. We noticed over here in the middle, we exchanged the authorization grant and the authorization code for the access token, right? So ultimately, we wanted to get to the access token bit, right? But when we set the initial connection up, when we set this connection up over here, we actually said to the authorization server that our response type, what we really want to do is we want to get back the code. Our response type is the code, which is basically the authorization grant, right? And if you look at it, you know, there are a number of different authorization code grants that can exist, right? But I just wanted to highlight that at this specific stage, right? And then finally, I'm just going to finish off that is because I've been keep using the word authorization, and OAuth 2.0 is essentially primarily used for authorization, but over the last several years, it was being used for authentication, right? Information about the user itself, right? So I'm going to leave this with the thought process here, and that is that what we have is we have OpenID Connect, and what basically that is that addresses the authentication part of the flow, right? And that will be covered in another module. Thank you.